This time I have the MFJ 971 tuner on the bench because it's been on the shelf and I haven't used it since I got it. And when I did try to use it just the first time, I noticed that the forward power on the meter was super low. So I didn't know what scale it was on or if it was calibrated or not. So this is a small attempt at some calibration. I've been playing with it a little bit, so I thought I'd share what I've done so far or what I'm about to do. So what I wanted to do is, if you look at the manual on the 971, or the meter face actually, you can see that they have a pretty good setup. And if you look at the back, if the button is pushed in with the jumpers, and I'll show you the jumpers. So the jumpers are, let's see if I get right there. You can see there's one set of jumpers here. So it's A on the right and B on the left, or low power on the right. And then the other one is here, and it's low on the left and high on the right. And then if you look at the manual also, they show you that, let's see, let me switch pages here, sorry. So they show you that on this diagram, which is actually looking at this orientation in the tuner, the front ones are for the forward meter adjust and the back ones are for the reverse meter adjust. And here's a look at those A and B switches again. So A is left here and right here. So this is, the confusing piece was, you look at the scale and you think you want to adjust the 6-watt scale. In the forward direction, it's 6 watts, but in the backward direction, it's actually 1.2 watts. So you need to adjust the back pot and then the bottom front left pot if you're going to adjust the QRP scales. And I'll show you those. You can see here, let me get some light in here. You can see there's a pot way back there, and there's a pot way up here. It looks like this one may have been changed, I'm not sure, or it just came that way. So I took a Sharpie, and for some reason couldn't find a black one, but I found orange. So I labeled that 6 watts, and I labeled this one 300 and this one 30, that's forward. And then the one way in the back is 1.2. This is 6 watts and this is 60 watts. And the reason that's true is because when you look at the meter, 6 watts forward scale is 1.2 watts reverse scale on the QRP side. And then you can either pick 30 or 300, and then this would then turn out to be 6 or 60 in the reverse direction. So we want the 6 and 1.2 watt adjustments to set the QRP side of this thing up. So then also, let me get back here again. You can see here that I've noted that this side is the antenna input, this is the transmitter input. And my plan is to, let's see, we'll try that. So we've got the K1 up here, and it's got pretty good adjustable power, so I'm using that for the source. And it says right now that reflected power says 1.0. And then if we set the scope to about, this is 15 volts per division, or pardon me, 5 volts per division, but 15 volts peak to peak. And I've done the math already down here for the special Hans calculation of peak to peak squared over 400 being watts. So we're at 15 right now, that's about 0.56 watts. And so if we look at the meter scale, you can see it's reading, I guess, about 0.6 watts, something like that. And then if we advance the power up to 20 volts, that should be 1 watt. And the K1 is pretty close. That's 5, 10, 15, 20. So that's 1 watt into 50 ohms. By the way, I'm using the MFJ 969 tuner, and dummy load is up off to the right in the dummy load position. And this is a Tech 2445A scope. And right now we are 5, 10, 15, 20 volts peak to peak, and that is 1 watt. And that's what the K1 says as well, as 1 watt. And you can see this now says 1 watt also. And it didn't say that before. At 1 watt before, it was reading somewhere down around like 0.4. So that was the adjustment there. Then if we go up to what, 40 volts, I guess. Well, we won't do this for too long because we're just sitting with the key down, but so we'll set this up to 40 volts, 5, 10, 15, 20. So that's full scale. So we'll go to full scale on the 5 volt per division, and that will be 40 volts peak to peak, a little bit more. Okay, and that looks like 40 volts peak to peak. And this says 4 watts, pretty much on the nose, a little bit low. And the K1 thinks it's 4.6. I noticed it reads slightly high on the top end, so I better stop that so we don't cause any heating up there. So then the other thought was, the only way I could think of to measure the reverse is to go back down where we're transmitting again and get down to something like 1 watt, because 1.2 watts is full scale, and that is 20 volts peak to peak. So there's 5, 10, 15, 20, and then turn things off. And then the thought is switch the antenna and transmitter sides and see what we read on the reverse direction. And what I found is I have to give a minor tweak to the tuner to keep it with no reflected power when I reverse directions. But let's try that again. So we'll turn on the K1 transmit, and there's a bit more than 1 watt. And if we look at the reverse meter, that would now be the forward meter. And it moves ever so slightly because it's a much higher range, but I think that's it. So then this says reflected power is 1 to 1 also. So we're going to go to 1 watt. That's 20 volts per division. And then we can read what is now the forward power, but on the reverse meter. And it says 0.8. And let's see how much variability we get here. It's about the peak of the tuner, the same time when the meter is reading minimum reverse power. So I'm going to change the 1.2 watt control, so that says 1 watt. So that's way back here in the corner. So we'll try the other end. You know, I did buy those fancy ceramic screwdrivers. I could have got that out. So we're going to turn that up to 1 watt, because that looks like what we have on the scope. It actually is slightly less now on the scope, so let me see. That looks like minimum reflected, and that looks like about 20 volts peak to peak, and that is 0.8, 0.9, just slightly high of 1, so I'll turn it down just a tweak. So I recognize this is a pretty non-exact science, but I did try jumpering the tuner out of the circuit, but even with a wire directly from here to here, which is jumpering out the tuner section, the tuner inductor and capacitor still had an effect on the signal. So I thought it was just as good to adjust it for null, and you guys can comment if you think this is bogus, but I think it gets me a lot closer than it was, and now it seems to read the right thing. So that's that direction. We'll switch it back again and see what we get. Okay, then we'll stick the box under here again and transmit. Whoops, I turned on the attenuator instead. Okay, there's the transmit, and the tuner is adjusting. And then I'm going to turn this to minimum. And then I'm going to hit the transmitter again and see if it tunes. Oh, it says 1 to 1 and it didn't tune. So I'll just null that a bit. Okay, then we'll get back to what I hope is 1 watt. And that looks like about there. That's 20 volts per division. And this meter now says 1 watt. So I think we're at least in the ballpark. I can sort of kind of believe it. I think it's better than it was anyway. So that's going to be the new QRP sort of in the portable. I want to, actually the idea is to put this 90 degree on and take this out to the field and see if we can use the MFJ 1820 sticking on this with some counterpoise connected to it, and then use the meter for the forward and reverse power. So there you go. That was the playing on the bench for the evening. Thanks for watching.